presentation. So hopefully you can all see the blue screen and a big Jaffa cake in the middle. So I was saying to Paul earlier when I joined the call, our dear leader, Mr. Gibbs, emailed me a few weeks back and said, would you mind doing a presentation about solar imaging? And he politely gave me about 6 or 7 days notice. And I went, no, bugger off. No, I said, no, but I was actually thinking about doing a presentation or writing a presentation. But unfortunately, the reason why I had to delay it is it'd been exceptionally cloudy and I hadn't got much data. And as you'll see as we go through this, there was a few things I wanted to chat through with everyone. So in the end, in between, I've just been spamming the Facebook page with lots of pictures of the sun and keeping James and Martin busy on the website. So solar imaging, a guide to data acquisition and processing. And I thought I'd start it off with the most unawe-inspiring image I could find. This one is actually quite important to me because it was the first ever picture of the sun that I took in 2018. I got into solar imaging right in the middle of a solar minimum. So you couldn't have asked for a better start, to be honest with you, taking a picture like that. And the reason why I got into it was because I bought a telescope. It was a Celestron Nexstar 6 SE. And in the instructions, you had a big warning saying, do not point it at the sun. And I thought, well, hold on, why not? I mean, I know it sounds obvious, but I have actually seen people take pictures of the sun. I wanted to know how they did it. So a bit of research, investigation later, a bit of Blue Peter stuff with some solar paper and some black cardboard. And I was able to make my own white light solar filter, stick a Nikon D90 camera on the back of the Nexstar and got this little picture. So yeah, that's what effectively started me off. So in terms of today, I mean, my focus when I'm looking at solar imaging is imaging in H alpha. So, you know, a lot of the stuff I'm going to be talking about today around acquisition will be about how I acquire that data. But equally, some of the things I'll be describing apply for white light imaging as well. The other thing to remember is that this isn't a recipe. This is just the way in which I do it. There's no right or wrong way. This is just my method. And I'll just encourage anyone who wants to get into solar imaging or is solar imaging at the moment to actually experiment and try different things, but to do it safely. But like any recipe, you need great ingredients. And the reason why I wanted to focus on data acquisition was if you get rubbish, if you take rubbish data out, you're going to get a rubbish image. So that's what we need. You know, in terms of this talk today, I really want to focus on that to some degree. And then at the end, what I'll do is just go through some recent data that I've acquired and show you the way in which I process it. As I say, it's not actually the definitive guide. So as always, with every solar presentation, we've got safety first. And if you're one of these people who, when told there's wet paint there, you go and touch it, or the plate is hot and you go and touch the plate, then please do not read this because you'll probably end up going to stare at the sun. But I would say it is important. It is dangerous what you do. I never observe the sun through an eyepiece for 2 reasons. One, I get headaches when I observe through an eyepiece, and 2, I'd rather burn a sensor than burn a Mark 1 eyeball. So next thing really be just to explain why we should observe our sun. But other than wearing a really loud shirt that I've got on now, I know you can't see it, but some of you would have seen it at the beginning. It is important for us to understand how the sun affects our modern Earth with all the electronics and satellites that we've got. Also, solar observing has certain benefits. The first thing is it's done during the day. So no late nights, no sub-zero temperatures, unless it's in the winter. It's quite sociable, actually, to do solar observing. Also, it doesn't take long. I mean, the data that we're actually capturing, the typical exposure times are somewhere in the region of milliseconds, you know, up to 10, 15 milliseconds. And that basically enables us to capture a number of frames over, say, a 20-second period, whereas deep sky photography, as a lot of you know, can take 5-10 minutes, depending on what you're imaging. Also, it doesn't have to cost a fortune. It is eye-watering now when I look at astronomy, well, astrophotography websites, and you see what the price of a solar scope is and the filters, and even like Herschel wedges and things like that. But it doesn't have to be an expensive hobby. You can create your own white light filter carefully using solar paper and some cardboard. The one that I took that picture at the beginning with cost me about 25 quid. Alternatively, you could do projection imaging and just project the picture of the sun onto a piece of paper. So, you know, it's what you want to make of it, whatever suits your budget. And the other good thing that we need to remember is that we are, despite the fact that I started in 2018, solar activity has really picked up this year. So the sun's got a 22-year cycle. There's 11 years of increasing activity, which I'm pleased to say we're just starting into. And then there's a further 11 years of decreasing activity. So if you want to start looking at the sun, now's the time to actually do it. And also it's pretty cool. I share a lot of my pictures with family and friends, and they're absolutely amazed that you can actually take a picture of the sun. No one's ever seen it. Usually the people's only experience of drawing the sun or seeing the sun is as a kid, where you put that little yellow quadrant in the top right-hand corner or left corner of a picture that you drew. So it's pretty cool to actually show people how, you know, what you've taken, and then listen to them ask, how do you actually do that? So what can you see? I've got 4 images here, and the one in the top left, that one shows a small, just, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but just here, there's a small arch there. And that is a flare loop. It's the post-flare loop of a flare that I missed, but which actually occurred on the limb. That's the northwest limb of the sun. This second image in the top right, this shows a number of filaments, which is on the solar disk. And then we've got this area here, which is a philoprom. A philoprom is basically a filament like this, but which crosses the limb, so it looks like a prominence in the dark part of the sky. And clearly here we have an actual prominence, and also here we've got a prominence. Bottom left, we've got a really big prominence, and obviously some more filaments there. And in the bottom right, we've actually got some sunspots, which you can quite see. I think there's 1, 2, 3, 4 sunspots there, and a few filaments thrown in for good measure. The majority of the images that I actually take are captured, as I said, in hydrogen alpha. And what that effectively does is it just captures one wavelength of light. Hydrogen alpha of the sun is basically a hydrogen fusion reactor. And the wavelength of light that we're capturing is 656 nanometers plus a little bit of change. And what that allows us to do is to view the chromosphere. So these 4 images, what they show you is the actual chromosphere of the sun. And one of the great things about the sun over deep sky imaging is that the sun changes every day. Every time, if I'm fortunate to have a couple of days in a row, you look at a sunspot that you've been tracking for a few days or a prominence, it's different every time you look at it. So I just wanted to talk you through what I use to take photographs of the sun. So probably not the best picture of the world, because I didn't realise I've got the barbecue behind there plus some other bits and pieces. But number one is the main scope itself. So that's a 60mm lunt pressure tuned hydrogen alpha telescope. It's the dedicated hydrogen alpha telescope. Lunt now do ones that enable you to image the sun and also do deep sky photography as well. At the back here, number 2, I have a ZWO ASI 174 mono camera and tilt adapter. I always use a tilt adapter purely because I start off with 0 magnification in the image train, and then I start adding Barlows and power mates, and as you magnify the sun more and more, Newton's rings can come in. So I always have a tilt adapter there, and it's actually wrapped in electrical tape so that no light can actually stream in or dribble in and cause aberrations within the image itself. The sensor, this camera is actually quite good and ideally suited for solar imaging. It's got a good size sensor. So with this actual setup, I can actually image a full disk. There's no need to do mosaics or anything like that to capture a full disk. And also it's got a very high frame rate, which is quite important when you're imaging the sun. Holding it all up is number 3 is the Skywatcher EQ6R Pro mount. This is kind of semi-permanent in my garden. I put it out there in March last year, and it's on a temporary pier, which is on wheels, so I can actually move it back in if I need to. And every night I just cover it in a Telegizmo weatherproof cover, and I've been using that, as I say, for nigh on 15 months now, and it's not been a problem at all. Use an issue which I've been able to control, but it's been good out there. Because I use it during the night time as well, it is nighttime polar aligned. So whenever you're doing solar imaging, if you're using an equatorial mount, you do need to be polar aligned. If you've done it already at night and left your scope out, then you're probably good to go. If you're bringing an equatorial mount out into your garden and you need to polar align, then you're going to need a compass or an iPhone or any sort of phone that we've got these days that's got a compass on it. And I use to basically point the scope to the north, sorry, point the mount to north. And I use an inclinometer in order to raise the scope to my correct latitude. And that generally kind of gets you in the ballpark. Because you're doing such short exposure times on these in solar imaging, actually tracking the sun really isn't much of an issue. You find you can probably do a 10-20 minute, 10-20 second image run, and then just reposition the sun centrally back into on the sensor if you need to. Equally, there's other mounts out there like the Solar Quest, which has got a sensor at the front, which will find the sun and just follow it for you. Number 4 is something that I've added this year, having said that short exposures and tracking aren't a particular issue. This is a high node Hughes solar guider. I bought this because I do a lot of animations. So I will literally point the telescope at a part of the sun, whether it be a sunspot or a prominence, and I will literally take something in the region of 100 to 150 images of it. And this will actually track the sun and keep it pinpoint on the actual object that I'm tracking. It's effectively PhD 2 for those of you who do deep sky astrophotography. It's PhD 2, but for the daytime. And it's also a solar finder as well. So for me, the Skywatcher mount is compatible with EQ mod. Behind the scope, I've got a box in there. It's a laptop. I connect the computer to the mount and fire up Stellarium, and then just select the sun in Stellarium, and the mount will just turn around and point straight at it. And I just have to make a few adjustments from there. Another new addition last year was number 5. So right at the very front of the scope is a double stack filter. Now your typical lunt, pressure tune lunt, will produce a full width half maximum of about 0.77 angstroms, which is, in terms of contrast, it's okay. It looks like a pencil drawing on a computer screen, but when you add the double stack, the full width half maximum actually reduces further to 0.55 angstroms, and you get a tremendous improvement in contrast and visibility of what's on the actual chromosphere. So that is probably just as expensive as the actual telescope itself, but worth its weight in gold. The thing you see behind it, number 6, with there's 3 knobs there, is an M90 adapter. Now you don't actually need the adapter to put the double stack onto the telescope, but what this adapter allows you to do is to rotate the actual double stack filter itself. One of the issues with the double stack is it's a tilt adapter, and you get what they call reflex images. They're just like bright circles that appear on the image sensor, and you can move the tilt, you can rotate the tilt knob to move them partly out of the way, but it doesn't necessarily give you the best possible tuned position. And by unscrewing those 3 knobs, you're able to actually rotate the double stack around, or effectively clock it. It's called clocking. Rotate it around to acquire the best possible position for the double stack and the pressure tuner that's built in to the lunt itself. The two other things that I use, which I haven't listed on here, is you'll just see behind the diagonal, there is a box on a table. There's a black sheet on there. I've actually got a photographic black sheet, which I stick over my head, which is always good fun when the neighbours see me with my head underneath a black sheet and stuck in a box. And the other thing I also use is some ice blocks, so the sorts of things that go into cool bags. I find the laptop that I use gets particularly hot. The fan literally goes berserk trying to cool the CPU down. It's really important to not have too many drop frames when you're taking pictures of the sun. And so having the ice blocks underneath really does help cool the computer down and stop the processor in the computer from throttling. So we've got the gear and we now need to take some images. But before I do that, I just need to plan the image session. I need to know what's on the sun. And I also need to know what I'm going to take a picture of. And my two go-to websites that I use are Space Weather Live, which you can either go onto in a web browser, or you can download the free app onto your tablet or onto your phone. And also the old favorite Gong H Alpha or NSO Gong H Alpha. So I just want to talk about these for a moment. So this is what the Space Weather Live website, the front of the website actually looks at. And the thing that I'm interested in is in this left-hand picture is this part of the sun here. And on the right is a blown up version of it. And here it will actually tell me where the actual sunspots are. And this is the sun correctly orientated in a north, south, east, west format. Now, the reason why I want to do that is because I've started submitting my images to Lynn Smith, who's the director of the solar section at the British Astronomical Association. And it's a requirement of their section that the images are correctly orientated. So for me, I always take a look just to see what's on the surface of the chromosphere, but at the same time, it enables me to actually orientate my camera correctly. Now, there are occasions, especially previous years when we've had solar minimums, where there's been literally no filaments on the disk and there's been no sunspots. And Gong H Alpha or NSO Gong H Alpha comes in handy in that regard as well. It doesn't obviously clearly show like where the sunspots are, but what it does give you is a live, or nearly not live version of what the solar disk looks like. So on the left here, we've got 7 disks. And you probably can't see it in the image, but it will tell you how many minutes it's been since it last produced that image. And so I tend to go to the one with the shortest time, so the one that's taken in the last 2 minutes, rather than one that was taken in the last 10 minutes. And then I'd look at the disk here. And for instance, we can see some sunspots, we can see some filaments here. But if there wasn't anything, then clearly there are some prominences in the top left and the top right. And I would use those as a guide to orientate my camera, okay? So how do I go about orientating the camera? Well, probably look at the right. I should have put the right image on the left and the left on the right. The first thing I do is I take the diagonal and I rotate it so it's actually vertical. So on an equatorial mount, you can see here that the telescope is actually tilted around the RA and DEC axis. But what I then do is I will rotate, rotate it clockwise or anti-clockwise through in the focus tube to make sure that the camera and the diagonal are as vertical as possible. I don't obviously put a spirit level up against it, but get it in the ballpark. The next thing I do is I'll actually rotate the camera in the diagonal so that the image that I see on my computer screen closely matches either the prominences or the filaments or the sunspots that appear in Space Weather Live or in Gong HA. What that enables you to do by adopting this approach is I use SharpCap to acquire my images. And this is a screenshot from SharpCap. And what this enables you to do is to use the directional controls on your mount so that the sun, when you press north, the sun goes up. When you press south, the sun goes down. When you press west, the sun goes left. And when you press east, the sun goes right. And that enables you to navigate easily around the disk. If you didn't have this kind of configuration, this way of setting up, you'd find that, you know, if I wanted to bring the sun down here, I'd probably go south first and then east. It may just track off at a diagonal, and it becomes a royal pain, to be honest with you, in order to achieve that. But by having that vertical approach with the diagonal, rotating the camera to match the orientation of the images on those two websites, what you can literally do as a test is put the reticle on the screen, and there's a little red hash up here. I always have a solar reticle on the screen, and you can literally go west, east, and the bottom of the sun will track along that baseline there. If it tracks as near as damn it along that baseline, then you know it's going to go up and down across the vertical line as well, and you've got the orientation correct. The only thing I would point out is that so if you then get into the afternoon, so this is me imaging in the morning. In the afternoon, things are slightly different. You may well need to flip the sensor in order to actually get that correct orientation. So the next thing I want to talk about is achieving focus. But actually, before I start on that, I know Martin uses a pressure-tuned lunt. Well, hopefully I'm correct in saying that he uses a pressure-tuned lunt. Dialing it in and tuning that pressure-tuned lunt in, lunt don't exactly give you much in the way of guidance on that. It's a case of just turn the knob until you actually see a decent image.
Oh, I know that Susan's had a letter to say she can expect the hospital appointment in about a month. So.
Okay, someone's got an appointment coming up. So in terms of actually tuning the lunt, what you can actually do is put the histogram on, the exposure histogram on. So if I just go back one screen, there's a little green peak here. If you press that, the whole bottom third of the screen becomes the histogram that shows you where you are. I mean, this is a smaller example over here on the right where you can see this histogram here. What you then do is turn the pressure tune knob, and what you want it to do, what you want the exposure to do is the histogram to do is to fall back, to reduce. And what should initially happen is the histogram will reduce, and then if you carry on turning, it will start going back up again. Now that point where it turns is where you're effectively tuned, where you need to be. So you turn the knob. If the actual histogram starts to rise, turn the other way. If the histogram starts to fall, keep turning it until it starts to rise again. And when you're on that lowest exposure point on the histogram, that's probably where you're best tuned. So again, just something to bear in mind. Now, exposure is one of the key things that we need to get right when we're imaging the sun. Despite it being the brightest thing in the sky, it's very hard to actually see, even on a computer screen, and to actually determine whether you've got good focus or not. In SharpCap, we have this histogram over here, and just at the top right-hand corner of the display histogram stretch screen, there's a lightning bolt. And if you press that button, it actually puts a black point, a vertical black point line, a mid-tone line, and a white point line on the histogram. So I will press that lightning button, and then I will zoom in, depending what I'm looking at. I've got a full disk here, so I zoomed in up here to 150%, and I will drag that mid-tone line to the right. And what that effectively does is it darkens this image, and it makes it easier to see. You can actually start seeing, the spicules on the sun, the surface of the sun. You can start seeing in a lot more detail. And then I will adjust the fine focus knob on the telescope in order to get the best possible focus. It's difficult still, even with that added contrast, because of seeing conditions and the shimmering of the image on the screen. But it's a lot easier than actually trying to eyeball it with putting this stretch in. So hit the lightning button, pull the midtones down to the right, put some magnification on the image if you need it. At this time I was up to 150%, and then adjust your focus in order to get the best focus position. So once we've done that, we're then into the wonderful world of what exposure do I set, what gain do I set, and what does that mean in terms of frames per second. So this is all about striking a balance. Now, one thing we need to understand is that the chromosphere of the sun is constantly moving. You can see that quite clearly when you zoom in on it. So it's important that we actually collect data as quickly as possible. And we do this by taking a short video recording of an area of interest, i.e. a sunspot or a prominence. Okay, so in that video, we want the highest frame rate that we can possibly get. So we also need to set an camera exposure time. And unlike astrophotography, as I said earlier, where this is measured in terms of minutes, solar exposure times are actually measured in terms of milliseconds. A high exposure time means a lower FPS, or frames per second, which isn't good. But as a ballpark, I will tend to set the exposure time so that my histogram is full by up to 70%. So if I just go back again and I look at this histogram here, this line, this is the white area here. If I go beyond the right-hand side, then I'll be blowing out the image. It'll be too bright. Where we are now is 70%. So I will have the line, the right-hand line, dropping down around the 70% mark. That's where I will aim for. And I will adjust my exposure time to actually get to that position. Now, as a guide, I probably wouldn't go above 10 milliseconds as an exposure time. Typically at 10 milliseconds with this particular camera, you're probably looking at a frame rate of just under 100 frames per second. So what you can do, if you're finding that to get 70%, you're actually having exposure times in excess of 10 milliseconds, you can increase the camera gain. Okay. Now, camera gain, most people might think, well, in deep sky astrophotography, the higher gain I have, the more noisy it gets. But it's not necessarily the case in solar imaging because the exposure times are so short. Raising the gain doesn't really impact that greatly on the actual noise that you see within the image. Okay. However, it's always important to capture as much data as possible. So the key to not having noise in your image is to record enough frames in your video of such high quality that your signal to noise ratio is high. And I will try to typically capture at least 2000 frames. So an FPS of say 100, that equates to a video of around 20 seconds. And I really don't want to be recording anything for longer than 20 seconds because the sun has practically just moved on by then. Okay. The other thing you need to remember is if you're going to put in Barlows or power mates into the image train, that will effectively darken the image more. And you would actually then need to either increase the gain further or exposure time further. But another thing to remember is you can obviously, with everybody with the ASI of 174, is you can actually bin it. So you can change it from one time binning to 2 times binning. Now, that obviously means that you're capturing more light and you can actually reduce your exposure times and your gain. But it does produce a smaller image, but sometimes that can be a really good trade-off, especially if you're using a high-powered power mate. You know, having a smaller image isn't necessarily a problem because you're probably doing a high resolution image of a very small part of the actual solar disk. Now, the final thing I just want to say about exposure gain and FPS, it's got here morning, noon, or afternoon, and this is where I just wanted to bring in the old problem of seeing. The seeing conditions. So for those people who are not familiar with what seeing is, the best analogy I can use is you standing on the edge of a swimming pool. So you're stood at the edge of a swimming pool at the shallow end. You look down at the bottom of the pool and you can see the lines painted at the bottom of the pool, which set out what the lanes are, the swimming lanes are. And in mill pond conditions with the water not moving, you're clearly going to see those lines. They're going to be sharp. They're not going to be moving at all. In a light wind rippling across the surface of that pool, those lines are going to start moving. They're going to start shimmering. And if a fat bloke like me dives in, then you're not going to see them at all. And it gets worse when you actually go up to the deep end, because when you go to the deep end and look down, you're looking through a greater volume of water. The light coming back at you is being refracted more. And of course, you know, it's a lot more difficult to see those even in mill pond conditions. But again, the same concept applies. You're looking through something and the light that's coming back is being distorted. And that's exactly the same thing with the sun. When we're pointing a telescope up at the sun, we are looking through the Earth's atmosphere. The atmosphere is the swimming pool. It's the water in the swimming pool. And there's a lot of things there which actually cause the sun to move around. Now, for most of us, unless we're in the deepest, darkest field in Suffolk, an event or something like that, most of us are going to be imaging from home. So actually changing your venue and going to the top of a mountain with crystal skies above you is not something that we're going to do. You're very much, you're very much at you're victim of your surroundings. So things that are going to affect the seeing conditions will be, are you on a patio, in which case heat will be rising off the concrete, rooftops around you, and the heat coming off of those will cause issues as well. Windy days and all that sort of stuff will actually impact on the seeing conditions. The one thing you can, in fact, actually change is when you do it. Do you do it in the morning, noon, or afternoon? And if anyone looks at my images, I typically do all my images in the morning. Now, the sun's a lot lower there than, say, midday or when it's crossing the meridian. But, for me, it's a lot cooler. The sun is rising, so I'm getting the benefit there. It's a trade-off. So have a think about the surroundings, where you're imaging from. What can you do to change things? Can you change things? And if not, what's the best time of day for you to actually do your solar imaging? So we've set all our gear up. We've figured out which way we should turn our camera to get the disc orientated correctly on our screen. We've got focus, we've tuned in the LUNT. We know all about swimming pools now. I'm just going to have a quick slurp. And you're ready to push the button. So next, I will, as I say, I always use the overlay function, really to identify the center of the camera sensor and to move them out to bring my area of interest into the center of the target, or at least create an interesting composition of other areas that are nearby. I would then, as it says here in number 2, I would name my image. And in this box here I would just put in solar. In this case, I put solar disk times 0. In other words, it's a picture of the whole solar disk with no magnification. And SharpCap will actually save the video file that I create into a folder called solar disk times 0. And it just makes it a lot easier for me after the imaging session to understand what I've actually captured and what detail is actually in that image. The next thing I'd do is I'd come over to the camera controls and the histogram, and I would look at whether things have changed, because if the sun's still rising, now that histogram could move off 70%, or it could move significantly beyond that. So I'll just check my exposure times one more time, make sure they're okay. Then I'll have a look at my focus. Does everything look okay there? And then I'll look at how many frames I'm going to take. And as I say, typically I would take, if I'm getting an FPS above 100, and just, you probably can't see it, but down here, it says I've got a frames per second of 130, which is quite good. I will quite happily capture 2000 frames in order to collect data for this particular image, okay? I will then actually take this image 3 times. The reason why I do that is seeing conditions, as I say, they can vary at any given moment in time. So I'll take this same image 3 times, and then when we get to processing, I'll then see which one I feel is actually the best. But before I move on to what I do after I've captured the image, I just want to talk a little bit about the seeing monitor. So for those of you who are familiar with SharpCap, there are 2 parts to SharpCap. There's the free version, and then there's SharpCap Pro. I actually use SharpCap Pro. It costs £12 a year. The first year I bought it, it cost me 12 quid. The next year they gave me 14 months for 12 quid. So, actually it cost me less than £1 a month to actually have that. There are some interesting features in there. So a couple of them are electronic assisted astronomy. So as I say, I'm not a great visual observer. I find it quite painful, to use a want of a better description, to actually look for an eyepiece. Wearing glasses doesn't help. And so for me, it's all about looking for a camera sensor. An electronic assisted astronomy is good. What that allows you to do is point your telescope at a nighttime object, take a series of exposures and just stack them. So the software in SharpCap Pro will actually automatically align and stack that image, and so you can actually see it build up. Alternatively, if you were doing a deep sky astrophotography run, you can do exactly the same thing. You can, even though you're using your deep sky camera to acquire the image, you can actually tell SharpCap to find the folder where your images are being stored, and it will then gradually build up that image. So rather than look at the same faint object, not doing much all throughout the night, if you then open up SharpCap Pro and use the electronic assisted astronomy, you can actually watch your image develop over a course of a night, which I think is a lot more exciting. But the seeing monitor is a kind of, it did start off as a focus assistant, which SharpCap Pro released, but what it effectively does is you've got your solar disk here, you've got your reticle around it, and there's a square box. That square box, you can control the size of it and where you position it. And so for want of a bit, for arbitrary, I've just put it in the center of the solar disk. And what the software then does is calculate how good the seeing is. So you end up with this graph, this yellow graph down the bottom, and anything to the left is poor seeing. Anything to the right is good seeing. When I say good seeing, it's relative to the poor seeing. And then you've got the higher peak in the middle, which is the average position. And what you can do is over here, you can average the number of frames at which it makes that measure. And the maximum it'll do is 50. It'll average over 50 frames. Typically, you want to be averaging 50% of your frame rate, or no less than 20% of your frame rate. And then beneath it, you can set the number of frames that you want to take. Now, watching this, you'll see these lines going up and down and moving left and right quite rapidly. But over here on this section where you've got scores, it will tell you what the best possible seeing was during that observation, in which case 7.6, and what it is at that particular moment in time is 7.19. And what I then do is probably take about 10% of that off, and you just click on this graph. So I might click at 6.8 and say, right, okay, that's my threshold. I want every image that you record to be above 6.8. And then we come to this box here, which says capture. And there are two, there's trigger capture or there's filter capture. Filter capture is the one I use. When you hit start, it will start to capture 2000 frames, but only if the seeing calculation is above 6.8. If it drops to 6.6, it will not record that image. If it goes to 7.3, it will record that image. If it drops back to 6.75, it won't record it. Okay, so you're basically telling SharpCap only take images that are equal to or better than 6.8 in terms of seeing conditions. Trigger capture is just basically saying, right, okay, my threshold is 6.8. I'm going to start it, and as soon as the imaging conditions go above 6.8, start recording 2000 frames, even if it falls below that. I've been playing around with it. It's good. It's okay. I haven't really captured enough images yet to say whether it's actually worthwhile having it, but it is an interesting tool. So that's the seeing monitor. I just wanted to say a few things about that. So we've taken our picture, and right, that's it, isn't it? We just take the computer, go upstairs, and we start processing it in the office. Well, no. Up until this point, we've worked extremely hard to get the data that we've acquired. There's going to be dust motes, and there's going to be light gradients and all sorts of stuff in our image. And so the next thing we want to do is we want to take some flats. So don't spoil your image by not taking flats. And the way in which I take flats is I will, if I'm imaging, say, a prominence, actually, that's not a bad example. That's a bad example. If I'm imaging a sunspot, which is not in the center of the disk, maybe it's up near one of the limbs or something like that, I will move the telescope to the center of the sun, or as best as I can get it towards the center of the sun. I don't change the camera orientation. I don't change the gain. Okay, but what I do is I adjust the exposure time to fill the histogram up to 50%. And I'll show you that in a moment. I don't change the focus. I'll leave it completely alone. I don't touch anything on the camera. Okay. What I then do is I've got a sandwich bag. Don't ask me what brand. And it's just crumpled up. I keep it in my pocket and cut of elastic bands, and I stick the sandwich bag over the front of the filter. Make sure my exposure is around 50% on the histogram. I then label the image that I'm taking, like I did before, sun disk times 0. In this case, I've used an example of active region 13001 times 3 flats. 3 means that's the level of magnification that I was using. And then I'll aim to take about 25 to 50 frames or more if the FPS allows. Now, the sandwich bag is quite a good idea. You can, if you want, go on First Light Optics and pay 75 quid for the Daystar flat cap that they put over there. But I tell you what, I've not had a single problem with the sandwich bag, although it did blow off once. I did lose one, and that caused me a whole world of hurt. I had to go chasing down the road, which made me look extremely stupid to the neighbours. So you're taking a flat. So what does it actually look like? Well, this is what the image looks like. This is a solar disk, so the full solar disk. So you can see at the top here, I've labelled it flats full disk. So I know that these are just flats for that full disk. They're not going to work on anything else. Over on the right here, I've got this display histogram stretch, and you can see the peak. This vertical line here is the 50% mark. You can see the peak is at the 50% mark. The FPS is 8.7, which is good. Exposure time is 117 milliseconds. That's the only thing I've adjusted to get this peak. The gain is exactly what I used for the original image that I was taking, okay? So the gain is exactly the same. Like deep sky photography, if you change anything in your image train, suddenly if I stick a Barlow in there or rotate the camera, use a different gain, you should really take flats. Not so much an issue if you just change the gain, but certainly if you rotate a camera or put another instrument between the camera and the diagonal, you should take flats again. And over on the left-hand side, I've chosen to take 100 frames. And then what you then do is stack them in auto stacker. This one here is slightly different. You can see up here, it says flats times 3. Here I've used a Barlow, the Altair Astro 3 times magnification Barlow. The histogram is quite different. The reason being is that there's it literally, because I'm looking at the center of the sun fills the whole sensor. So there are no dark bits. It's just a variation of bright light, which is why you get this type of peak. Again, the gain is still the same as 189. The exposure time is now 800 seconds. Before it was 117. It's 800 seconds because I'm using higher magnification. And on this occasion, rather than going quick capture and 100 frames, I'll go up to the heading at the top here where it says capture, and it will say start capture, which will bring up this box. I'll select number of frames, 50, nothing else, everything else is blank, and I'll click start, and you actually then capture the data you need for your flat frames. Okay. So that kind of brings us to the end of the actual PowerPoint presentation. We are got a bit of time left. What I want to do now is just go into some live processing, and I'm going to be using 3 pieces of software: AutoStack 3, ImPPG, and Affinity Photo. Now the great thing about these, the 2 of these, is AutoStack and ImPPG is actually free. Affinity Photo costs at the moment £47.99p, though they do actually have offers on from time to time. I've seen it as low as 24 quid. And unlike Photoshop, that's a fixed fee that you've just paid one-off, no repeating subscriptions or anything like that. So I'm just going to switch off the slideshow, and then we'll jump into some processing. So here I've got AutoStack. what I might do, right, just to save a little bit of time, because I've actually got the images already stacked, is I'll probably just show you what I do in terms of processing the flats, and then talk you through what I do in terms of setting this up to process the main image. So in terms of setting up the flats, it is different than stacking the live image. I go to image calibration, and I go, oh, it's not letting me do that. Let me turn it off and start again. Oh, that's interesting. It's not letting me actually load a master frame. Actually, I know what I'm doing wrong. I'm doing this wrong. Okay. So this is the video file for the flats. Here you can see it. It's great. It's just a grey image, and there's a dot there, and you can see a little bit of dust motes here and here. If we go image calibration, here we go, create master frame. So this is what we want to do. And it brings up this screen. And to be honest with you, the first time I did this, I thought, well, why is it bringing me that up? I don't want to save anything. I haven't created anything yet. But it's actually asking you to tell the computer, tell AS3, where do you want to save the flat to? So I'm going to go and choose a file, which is here. And it asks you for a file name. So I'm going to put master flat in there, and I'm going to go save, and it's processed it. So it's actually just created that flat image. That's all it did. As I say, it's completely different to what we do in terms of an actual image. So we've got some live data. So let's go to open, go back to the desktop, and let's look at this. When did I take this? 15th. Oh, I took this yesterday. There we go. So here we go. We've got 3 sunspots here and a large filament there. There is no flat attached. I don't know if you can see, there is a dot there, which is a dust mote. There's not much in the way of gradients, but in order to load the flat onto this image, you go back to image calibration again, and you do load master flat. And then it will ask you to tell the computer where the flat is, which is the folder where I saved it in. And if I open it, watch that black dot disappears. Okay, and if there was any kind of gradient there or anything like that, that would disappear too. The only thing I would say is if you recall at the beginning, I said I've got a tilt adapter on my camera to stop Newton's rings appearing on the image. Flats will not remove Newton's rings. If you've got Newton's rings and you take flats, you'll just get Newton's rings on your flats. So it's not going to do anything there. Let's see how, I won't put improved tracking on because it can take a bit of time. So what do I do next? So I've got the image open. I make sure I'm selected on surface. I would normally have improved tracking. I have it set to cropped. So what that will do is it will actually crop the image so that everything, when it stacks everything up, it will then crop it so you've got the maximum amount of the viewable image available to you. There's not going to be any artifacts around the side. Laplace, I would actually drop that down to 3. Don't ask me what it is. I understand it's very complicated and very mathematical. But with a 3 times Barlow, I know I'm going to get really good data. So I drop it down to 3. I'll leave this on local, auto size, don't touch it. That's all you need to do. And then I just hit analyze and it will analyze the image. So we'll just wait for that to process. Oh, now it's going to do improved tracking. Brilliant. While it's doing that, you can probably see this highlighted bit at the top. If you want to know, if you want to have confirmation that your flat is actually applied, you can see it here. It says here flat. So you know that that's actually applied to the image itself. As this goes through and analyzes each of the images, what we're going to do next is we're going to put some alignment points on this image over here so that when we choose how many of our, this is 1,000 frames, so what percentage of our 1,000 frames we want to stack together to create our final image, it will know where to align them all. So just wait for this. Once it gets up to 100%, the next section will be quite quick. And that red line, the red box that you see around there, denotes where it's cropping the image. Okay, so as you can see here, that's an interesting graph. We've got, how shall I explain this? So along this axis, if you imagine we've got 0 here, This vertical line is 25% of the images or frames. This section is 50% of the frames. This is 75% of the 1,000 frames. And this is 100% of the 1,000 frames. And if you want to know why I know it's 1,000 frames, you just see at the top right-hand corner, it says 1 of 1,000. So I know it's 1,000 frames. On the vertical axis, it's the quality of the image. So this first horizontal axis here is 25%, and then the next one's 50%, as denoted by that 50% there. Then we've got 75, and then we've got 100. And the green line is a representation of where each of those 1,000 frames actually sit. So it gradually drops off. Normally, this would just go straight down into the bottom right-hand corner. But what I look at is this 25% mark in conjunction with the 75% line here. So this is 75% and this is 25%. So if I chose to stack 25% of my images, I know that where this green line intersects the 25% line, arbitrarily, those images or those frames will be better than 75% because they're above the 75% line. Questionable whether that's the case, but what we'll do is we'll choose to stack 25% of them anyway. I wouldn't normally go that high, I'd probably only do about 10, but I'll do 25. So I've put 25% in there. You can, in the other boxes, put different percentages if you wanted to, but that just increases the processing time there. Next thing is to place the alignment points. For this size of image, 3 times magnification, I will choose an AP size of 48, and I have minimum bright of 10, and I'll just place AP grid. And that's going to give me around 3,000 alignment points, which we can see here, 3,135. That's typically what I go for. And then I just hit stack, and it will go through and work its magic, and then we'll end up with an image. If you had less than 3,000 alignment points, let's just say it was 120, you can actually go in and click on the image and manually put them in yourself. Alternatively, you can adjust the minimum brightness up or down to increase the number of alignment points that you actually need. The other thing to remember is that you don't actually have to just stack a percentage of the 1,000 frames. I mean, 25% is going to be 250 frames, which is more than enough. You can actually tell also stack it in the top box how many frames you actually want to stack. So this is done now. So it's stacked it, it's saved it. And the next thing I'm going to go into is ImPPG. I don't know how many of you have actually seen this. As I said, this is free software, and this is a cracking little tool. So I'll go into here. Let's go and find my image. I think I was already there. There we go. So there's our image. We just open it up. So first thing it does is it gives you the full 100% experience, which clearly is not too convenient. So we'll just decrease that a little bit. You'll then see that there's a box around, it's just centered on the image. It's always centered on the image. And what that's doing is it's actually applying some adjustments to the image, and it's just doing it in this sample box because it probably assumes that your computer isn't fast enough to actually cover the whole image. But we don't need to do that. We can actually get it to make the initial adjustments across all of it. And so you do that by pressing this box up here. And as you can see now, we've now got a level of sharpness in there, and where that's originating from is this top left-hand box, Lucy Richardson deconvolution. I guess someone called Lucy and someone with a surname Richardson came up with this algorithm. They could have just called it sharpening, but yeah, Lucy Richardson deconvolution is what this is applying to actually sharpen the actual image itself. And we can actually make that adjustment more. We can make further sharpening adjustments if we wanted to. And the way I go about doing it is I would increase the iterations to 70. It's up to you what you want it to be. And I click this box saying prevent ringing, because that introduces artifacts into the image. Sigma is basically the level of sharpness, the amount of sharpening you want. The higher the number, the more sharpened it will be. Let's just put a number in there. Let's put 5 in there. And yeah, that's not great, is it? So we don't really want 5 in there. And if we put 2 in there, So we've dropped it down. Again, that's still not great. It doesn't look good to me. 1.3 is where we started. So let's go back to that. Can we do anything more? Can we go to say 1.4 or 1.5? Probably a bit too much as well. So I'm going to leave it at 1.3. And the reason being is that we're going to apply sharpening elsewhere. Unsharp masking down here, I never really touch it. But again, because in Affinity Photo, I will use the unsharp masking there to make the adjustments. So the next thing I would do, once I've got to this stage, is click on this curvy line, which is the tone curve editor. And this brings up this box. Again, it's the histogram that we're familiar with in SharpCat. And there's a line here which you can actually adjust to make changes to the brightness and contrast in the image. So if we push it up, it goes really, really bright. We pull it down, it goes really, really dark. If we reset it in between, we get the same image we had originally. We can hit this button that says stretch, and it will bring in the white point. So down here, the bottom left is the black point, where all this data in the bottom left-hand corner is. Over here on the right is the white point, which is where all these little bright areas are. And by stretching it, what we're doing is we're bringing in that white point, and we're getting a little bit more contrast. So just reset. Well, actually a little bit more brightness, because we're bringing in that line a little bit more. And you can, if you want, just make subtle adjustments. Put a little S curve in, say something like that. Suddenly we've got more contrast on the chromosphere, and we've got a little bit more data, a little bit more of the plage or plage areas around the sunspots popping out a bit more. I just zoom out a little bit more so you can see the whole image. And to be honest with you, I'll be quite, if I had no other processing software to use, I'd be quite happy with that. I'd say, yeah, stick with it. I'm going to go with it. But of course, we can take that into other software to process it a little bit more, which I'll show you in a second. But there's one last thing I wanted to show you. Those of you on Facebook or have looked at the website will be familiar with the fact that I don't tend to leave my images looking natural like this. I invert them because sometimes you can miss a lot of data. And there are people out there that say, I don't like inverting images. Sunspots should be black and not white when you invert them. It's not real. Well, I've not been up close to the sun and seen what it looks like. So I don't know how people can say that. But there is data out here on the limb, which we're missing by processing it in this way. So I will look to invert the image. Now, there is this button here called invert. I never use it. You can't really control it that well. But what I'll do is I will look at this low point here and just click on the line at that point, just beneath it. And then we've got the low point right in the bottom left-hand corner, and I'll ramp it all the way up to the top. And suddenly you can see all these little prominent, oh God, what have I done there? You can see all these little prominences on the limb. Then what I'll do is I'll take this first point I put in and I'll bring it right over hard against the left-hand side. And this bends that line, and then I'll put another point in just at the minimum again, and I'll raise it up to here. Then I'll look at that minimum point again, and I'll drag it up almost level with that peak there. And I'm thinking, yeah, that's a real classy image. It's nice and white, but no, we've got a few more adjustments to make. So I'll go to the white point at the top right, and I'll bring it right down. And then we can start fine tuning it. And the best way to describe this is every point on this line is like, you're kind of peeling a layer off on the actual disc. It's like peeling a layer off of an onion. So if you look at the very limb, the prominence is on the limb. If I move this first point, you see how it gets brighter and darker? Again, very quickly, I'll just make some subtle adjustments. So I'll keep that there. I'll put another point in here. And it just darkens the edge around there a little bit more. I'll leave this point where it is for now. I'll put another point there, and just inside the limb, you see just inside this white line. Oh, he's done it again. If I pull that down, you can see it's just getting a little bit darker. And then all the way along here, I'll just put more points and bring it down. and suddenly you start to reveal a totally different image than what you had before. A really dramatic image with black sunspots, but you can actually see the prominence detail out there. And that's the kind of curve that I'll be aiming for to actually invert this image, compared to, you know, just hitting the invert button there. So the last thing I just wanted to show you was what I would actually do in Affinity Photo. So I've got that open here. Let's open up our image that we stacked. I think that's the, well, it'll do. This is actually, that's a different image, isn't it? There we go. Let's close that down. So here we are in Affinity Photo. And the first thing I will do is I'll go to Document, and I will go and remove the tick next to transparent background. I will remove it. The reason being is that I label my object, my images. I put little commentary along the bottom of what it is and what I took it with. And if you turn off, if you don't have transparency background turned off, you end up with a checkerboard effect. You start seeing the actual canvas behind the image, which is quite annoying. What I also do is I will convert the format from Grayscale to RGB 16-bit, and the one you want to use is sRGB. That's for most monitors these days. That's a good one to use, so I'll choose that and just hit convert. And the first thing I'll do, and again, this falls under the heading, just keep it simple. We just want to do simple things, is I'll just go to filters and haze removal, okay? And what we're trying to do is just try and take that fogginess that's on the image away. There we go. It's got, you see, it's just got a little bit darker than what we had before. We've got more contrast in the image. And you can alter that by just adjusting the strength. You can see that it's like, with nothing applied, it goes back to where it was. With too much applied, it goes extremely dark. So you would just adjust that a little bit. And the exposure will bring out those white areas really well, or too much, and too little, it just makes the image look a bit odd. But you can adjust those areas just to bring in that contrast. And I'll click apply. And that's that done. The next thing I'll do is I'll go to layer, new live filter layer, and sharpen. And then I'll go to clarity. So layer, new live filter layer, sharpen, and then clarity. It creates a new layer here on the history section. And what I will do, again, this is all about increasing contrast, but at the same time, increasing a little bit of the sharpness, the detail that's in the image. So I'll start off, let's put 50% in there. Apologies, it's taking a little bit long. I actually use Affinity Photo on my Mac, and it's a lot quicker than it is on a Windows machine. There you go. So you can see that's 50% strength. That's before, that's after, before, and that's after. And I think that's too much. So I'll drop that down. I'll go to say 30, see what that looks like, wait for it to catch up. Now it's a little bit better, but I know we're going to do a few other things to it. So maybe we'll just stick with 20 and move it to 20. Again, just subtle changes. That's all we're looking to do, is just subtle changes. I'm assuming that that's actually done. Let's just merge visible. Okay. So the next thing I'll do is go layer again, new live filter layer. So the same section, sharpen and unsharp mask. So we had the option of using this in ImPPG, but I chose not to use it. Here I am going to use it. Now, for any of you who've used unsharp mask, typically what it does is it looks at pixel level detail. So it's asking me to put the number of pixels in that I would like this to work on. And the lower the number, the finer the detail it's going to sharpen. So if I zoom in at, say, 100%, if I put 2 pixels in there, And then again, just wait for it to catch up. Is it? Yeah, so let me just make it a little bit more obvious. Yeah, I don't know if you can actually make that out, but if I go, this is before, that's before, and that's after. You've got a lot more fine detail coming out. You've got before, blurry, after, sharper. And some people who process their images will be quite happy to just leave it at that and move on. I actually will do that. I will probably scale this back a little bit because I think the focus was kind of okay, and we've done a bit of sharpening work already in ImPPG. So, and especially around finer detail, that's what ImPPG will be focusing on. So I will just tone it down a little bit, and then I'll go back and do it again. So I'll go layer, live filter, sharpen, unsharp mask. And what I want now are the bigger regions. You know, there's some really dark areas here. That filament is really quite dark. That's not 2 pixels in size. I'll go for some bigger regions. Just put in 50 pixels, see what happens. Okay, so here we can see it's really added more contrast. I mean, that's effectively what unsharp mask is. It's just adding contrast. Probably overcooked it a little bit there. So again, you've got the option of either reducing the 50 pixels or changing your opacity down. Let's go for something like 25. Let's see what that does. Okay, so that's before and that's after. Before and after. Again, probably a little bit too much. So again, I'll drop it down 60% and call that a day. Obviously, you take more time over this. I'm just conscious of time as I'm working through this. But yeah, what you end up now with is a much more detailed image. Now, the final couple of things you could do would be to add some color. I very rarely do it, although I did a lot of it today. So I'll click the little paintbrush tool over here and start painting in, if it's going to let me work properly. There we go. Actually, oh, there we go. It's actually done it. It's probably not caught these edges quite well, but for what we're trying to do here, I think that'll work. So then I'll go into make a curves adjustment. So curves is Control M. It's about the only one I can remember. We've already converted the image to RGB, so we know we can make color out of it. So I select the red channel. I start off here and I push this up to that mark there. I think with the Wi-Fi and everything, it's making it a little bit slower, but you get the general idea of what we're trying to do. And then if I go select the next one, give it a bit of blue, again, start up here, drag it down to there. And we got a nice yellow color and then a little bit of green. I'll start in the middle and just draw it down a tad. You got slightly more burnt orange color, which is something I like. Remember, this is what you like. You're the one who spent the time actually capturing the data. This is your image. You just got to make it your own. So that's what I end up doing here. If I take that off, let's select, deselect all. The next thing you can do is go layer, new adjustment layer, and if you go to vibrance, and if you wanted to, you can increase the saturation slightly. So put 5% in there. And we can merge that. So it just brings out a little bit more detail, a little bit more brighter color, a bit more poppy in terms of what's coming out of the screen. And then the last thing I would do is I'll go to the adjustment layer again, and I go to brightness and contrast. And I will probably turn that circle off. I'll probably put this, say, at 15%. And what I'm looking to do is the limb here, this edge here. If you imagine the sun is a sphere, so the brightest part facing us in the middle, with a bit facing us in the middle, will be the brightest part. The edge of the limb will be a bit darker. So by increasing this, so 20%, and darkening that limb, you get more of a kind of a 3D feel. Again, just play with it. And that, as they say, is it. That's how you that's how I go about processing an image in Affinity Photo, from basically from putting everything out in your garden, pointing at the sun, right up to stacking the image. After that, you can label it, put whatever else you want to do on it. I would actually, one of the things I would do is actually resize it. So I'll go to document and resize. At the moment, it's nearly 2000 pixels wide, which is quite a big image. For most websites, things like Facebook, what have you, 1024 is a good size. I'd make sure the padlock is still on, so it actually keeps the same aspect. And I'll just hit resize, and then there you go. You got 100%. That's 75% of the image. You can see that now. Three sunspot regions in the filament, and there's your chromosphere for you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now.
Fantastic, John.
Yeah, well done.
Excellent. Excellent. That would be pointed to.
I knew nothing about the ImPPG software, so that was a new one on me. So that was really impressive.
Yeah, I've already found the website. It's on its way.
Yeah, me too.
Is that Windows only? That
Yeah, I mean, I yes, you can even welcome. I want it. Yeah, I like you, Martin. I use Mac, but the ISO stacker is something that needs Windows in order to operate properly, which is a bit of a pain. And I bought one of these little budget box Windows machines with an AMD processor in, because when I actually agreed with Andy that I'd actually do the presentation, I didn't realise that you wouldn't be able to see 2/3 of it if I did it on my iMac. So I had to buy a camera and a little PC in order to get this done. So it was worth it anyway. Hopefully this isn't going to be the last one I do, but there we are.
Yeah, it's excellent. So have you recently converted to Affinity Photo, or are you still use PixInsight for your solar images?
I think I'm kind of working across both of them, to be honest with you, because when I look at prominences, one of the effect PixInsight was to make, I do the black solar disk and then just the prominence, and I usually have it reddish. I like to see that glow above the disk, and you can never really achieve that in PixInsight, but you can in Affinity Photo. So although I'll never use it, or I say never, I'm not inclined to use it for deep sky. I use both. I use both PixInsight and Affinity Photo, and actually one of the reasons why I wanted to do this presentation is I said to you, look, I'm not going to focus on PixInsight because I don't think there's many members who actually use it. Most members are probably going to, get Affinity Photo. I've got access to Affinity Photo. Certainly, it's kind of cost effective. Let me see if I'll do a presentation around Affinity Photo, and didn't know how I was going to do it. So I've been lucky these last 3 or 4 weeks where the weather's been reasonably okay, that I've been able to go and acquire lots of different data, and then come in and sit down and go, how do I do this in Affinity Photo? So And it just goes back to what I said at the beginning. You know, it's all about just experimenting. This has got to be fun. I mean, we do this. I do this for two reasons. One, it's got to be fun, and two, it's got to be a challenge. And when someone puts in a book, "Do not point at the sun," I see that as a challenge, right? So, and then when someone says to me, "Do you want to do a presentation?" I'm already thinking about it, and then I'm like, "Well, I know nothing about Affinity Photo, really. Okay, let's go and see if I can make it work." I'm sure, you know, given a lot more time, you know, you can make the images look a lot better. But to be honest with you, good is good enough, and I'm happy with it, and that's the main thing. As long as I don't care what other people think about them. I like the idea that you can do this, and I like the images that I produce. If I get too sensitive about what other people think, at the end of the day, I'd never do it. Martin, you got your question?
Invert or not invert? That is the
I'm not
question.
inverted. I think there's a place for both, to be honest with you, because as I said, there's a lot of detail that the more natural image doesn't reveal. I mean, if you are just taking a picture of this close-up of the solar disk and there isn't anything on the limb, then probably you just go for the more natural look. But it comes back to what you actually want to do, what you want to achieve from it. I think the inverted images are very dramatic. I also think that with a bit of tweaking, you can really produce almost like a 3D effect on things like filaments and things like that. I don't quite know how I've managed it in occasions, but I think a lot of it is through that unsharp mask, you know, using say 1.4 to 2 pixels and then stepping it up to, you know, to 15, 16 pixels and actually bringing out the contrast in those larger objects that are actually on the sun. So, you know, I've actually produced so many images that over this week, I think, where I've, you know, obviously the one that you're referring to, where I've done it natural and inverted, and I try and keep the images exactly the same. So obviously they're the same orientation, they're identical. One's just inverted, but I try and keep them the same size. So as you flick through, if you do flick through, and one goes, you see the natural one, but it goes on top, you actually see the difference. But when I look at things on Facebook, if I just press the right arrow and the image drops in, then you can actually immediately see what the differences are. And I think it just gives you two different views. It's great.
Yeah.
I think you know, you use artistic license, don't you? You know, you can use your own interpretation, what you think looks good, really. That's the
yeah, I think so. And I think, you know, this thing around like the orientation, I know Martin was speaking about that earlier. I never really thought much about orientation until I actually started sending images into James and Martin. And when I started looking at some of the other images on there, I thought, why are they rotated? You know, why are they all off at an angle and things like that? I just, in my mind, go, why is it that? Why didn't James or Martin put them in the right way around? And it's, of course, then exchanging emails with James. He's like, correct orientation. And I'm like, okay, fine, fair enough. So I'm like, well, fine. You know, I don't know what's up and what's down in space, but if there's a convention that's up and that's down, then I might as well just follow it. And then finding out from Lynn Smith and the solar section that actually your images are around the wrong way or they're not quite right. And I actually emailed her because if you go up, if you remember the BAA and you go on the solar section, all of their images on there, actually there's a lot of drawings actually, which is really cool. Some beautiful drawings, and it's great to actually contrast and compare and contrast your images of that object that someone's drawn, and to see what they saw and to see what you've actually captured digitally. I think it's brilliant. But no one was actually putting, I couldn't actually find an inverted image. And I thought, well, I don't really want to send anything in if they're just going to reject it. So I emailed her and I said, look, if you go on to, you know, the normal gallery, you'll see that I invert my images. Is that a problem for you? She goes, no, just send it in. You're the only one who doesn't, you're the only one at the moment who wants to invert their images, but we're fine with it. Just make sure it's the right bloody way around. I'm like, okay.
can you recommend any books to read on the subject, or?
Yes. Yes. Let me go into the cracking. I mean, it's as technical as you want to get it. The chap who wrote this book and the contributors are absolutely amazing, and they do go into the technicalities of it. And to be honest with you, some of it was way over my head, and I'm trying to. Here we go. So just waiting for the page. It's called Solar Astronomy here, and I've got, who's it written by? If you go on to, I mean, Paul, you've got your computer there as well. I don't know if you can put these links into it, but it's solar-astronomy-book.com.
Hang on. Solar-astronomy.
Astronomy dash.
Yeah. Book.
Yep. solar-astronomy-book.com. And Christian Velledrick is the main author, and well, he has produced some imagery which is out of this world, absolutely out of this world. But there are a number of contributors to the book. Some of them are imaging H alpha, some of them do white light, some of them do calcium. A lot of them have built their own scopes, which is frankly amazing. You know, they've built these things from scratch, these weird contraptions. Have you managed to find it?
Yes. Yeah. Observing,
and
imaging,
there's
and studying
a forum.
Yeah.
That's it. That's the one. That's the one. And then in terms of like a community for it, there's the Charlie Bates Solar Astronomy Project, otherwise known as the Solar Chat Forum, all one word, solarchatforum.com. It's a little bit clunky, but some of the people who are the authors of that book actually contribute to this particular forum as well. And again, there's a lot of information there. In fact, the guy who wrote the ImPPG, his actual nickname was the Great Attractor. I don't know what his real name is, but he's known as the Great Attractor. But Solar Chat Forum is a great source of information. It's also a great source for finding out about new software, asking questions. And if you want to cannibalize your solar scope and you've got some ideas for doing it, they can tell you whether you're going to lose your eyesight or not.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Oh, yes, I've just found the Great Attractor, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if, sorry.
Martin.
Yeah, if folks want to know more about Affinity Photo, they produce an excellent workbook. So it's trying to find his camera. Don't drop it on your foot because it's heavy. But it's very well written, lots of illustrations as to how to do all the various things that you saw in the menu on John's screen.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know what people use for acquisition software for the data. As I say, SharpCap is my go-to. You know, one of the reasons why I started using SharpCap is they've got a really good polar alignment thing in there for when you're doing the deep sky photography. A really good tool for helping you to polar align. The other one is fire capture. I struggle with fire capture. I can never really get it to to download properly. Plus, I think it's quite busy, and I'm one of these people. Once I've learned something once, if I learn something new, it just pushes the old stuff out of my head. So I'd rather hang on to the bits that I've got, to be honest with you, and work on that basis. So I'm familiar. It's a bit like Sequence Generator Pro, Andy. I don't really want to switch because it means I've got to learn how to use something else again. And same with SharpCap. I don't want to move because I'm happy with it.
I'll definitely want. I'm still holding on to the original version of Sequence Generator Pro, which I purchased. I'm not going to go to the subscription model for that at the moment because the version I've got works well. And,
Paddy's just firstly, Paddy, thank you very much for that. The BAA, they have their own they have their own solar observation section, and they just make them available. So I don't know if you have to be a member to actually view it or not, but when the BAA issue their journals, some of those images do actually appear in there. A lot of the stuff that goes on in the solar section is really around sunspot counting and flare counting and stuff like that. And people analyze these things in white light and hydrogen alpha and calcium over a period of months, and they will upload this information to a database, and they use that to provide a statistical analysis of the sun and its activity. The imagery, I think, you know, in terms of scientific value, I guess it's a record of what the sun is actually doing. But yeah, as I say, the images could be anything from what I've just shown you. There's a guy called Monty Leventhal, who's in Australia, who won an award actually, because I think he does the Stonyhurst discs. So he plots out the P line and the BO line and the LO line, and he tells you where all the sunspots and flares are. But it's all just a piece of paper and a drawing. And he submits that as a permanent record to the BAA, which I think is what they're after. But you know, with the solar, with the sun picking up in activity now, I think in the BAA journal that came out just the other week, they had the most number of digital images submitted in a quarter than they've ever had in previous quarters. And I think that just goes to show how many people are actually interested in the sun. And in fact, you go on some forums now, even if you go on the Solar Chat forum, it's swamped with white light images because one, hydrogen alpha filters are expensive, and two, even if you could afford one, as we all know, getting astronomy gear is quite difficult. So people are making their own filters, you know, the solar paper and what have you. And they're taking an interest, which I think is great. And as it's the summer as well, and not much deep skies going on, all power to them, really.
Well, for Affinity Photo, if you don't go to get the massive tome that Martin has, there's a guy called James Ritson. And if you look online, he actually does some stuff officially for Affinity on their website, but he also has his own things. He produces macros. He's got YouTube tutorials on using Affinity. So if you look up James Ritson online for Affinity Photo, he does a lot of good stuff.
Is he the guy who does the astronomy bits on about Affinity?
Yes.
Yes. Right.
yeah, he's up to version 13 of his macros now, I think. So for Affinity Photo. So yeah, and he's pretty good. Some of these and some of his tutorials are pretty easy to follow as well. So.
Just going back to ImPPG, there is a YouTube tutorial on there from a company called telescopes.net. So they show that inverting of the image that I showed you. So you know, if anyone is interested in perhaps having a go at capturing some solar data and inverting it, then you know, looking that up. Telescopes.net is the company, and they've got their YouTube page where they show that.
Go back to doing your animations. Obviously, you take a series. When you do your animations, you take a series of shots every same minute. But how do you stack them? Do you batch stack them, or?
Yeah, so obviously I pointed at the area of interest, and I don't know if you remember, you can start capture, and you go into capture and then start capture, and there you tell SharpCap how many frames you want to capture. So let's just say it's 500 frames, and then there's a box below that says how many times do you want to repeat this, and then you can tell it how many repetitions of those 500 frames do you want. So I'll put in, say, 100. So I'm going to get 100 files made up of 500 frames. And then it will say, how often do you want to space them apart? Or what timing do you want between them? And typically I'll go for 30 seconds, because you might have clouds coming in and stuff like that. And if a cloud comes in and you've set it for like a minute, say, then it's going to look jerky if you have to drop one of those images because it didn't work. You know, clouds were there, it was dark. So I'd set it for 30 seconds. So you just let it run. And obviously having that solar guider is fantastic because it just locks on and really it doesn't move. And so you effectively fill up your hard drive with loads of data. And then when you go into auto stack it, to stack them, you're just going to open, like, should I go share my screen again?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm on the wrong computer. I'm using the wrong mouse. Sorry. Let me just stop my video so this will work. Share screen. So I go into auto stack it. You go open. Let me find one that I did. I did one. I've actually deleted the data, but when you go in here, you'd have a video and you'd have 100 videos, and you literally, all you do, Martin, is you select them all. You select them all, and you see select all 100, and it'll load them all up. So you'll have down in the bottom right hand corner here, you have 1 of 100, and you basically process the first one, and it then applies the same parameters to the other 99. And what I do is if I've, like I did one today, I haven't uploaded it yet. I haven't actually done anything with the data yet. But what I would do is I would load it into Auto Stacker 3 because it takes a hell of a long while. I'll get it to stack and I'll just go to bed and deal with it in the morning because it does actually take that long. The other thing after that is once you've got, what you then end up with is theoretically 100 individual images.
Yeah.
And you've then got to be able to process them and bring them all together. And that is where I don't know how Affinity Photo would do that, but PixInsight can do it. So with PixInsight, if I just, again, just share the screen, close that down. If I open an image, let's go to the one we were just looking at. So this is the image from earlier. So I could crop this image. So I do that. So I take one of those 99 images, I do this, I just crop it. I'm just not doing anything special, just cropping it. And then I would probably sharpen it a little bit, choose a preview, have a look at that, see what that looks like. That's a bit sharper, okay, and apply it to the real image. So the image is a bit sharper. And then we might do a bit of unsharp mask. Right, let's move that out of the way. So that's before, that's after, that's no good. That's before, that's after, yeah, I'll go with that. So just move that over. And then we'll do the big one, 15 and see what that looks like. Yeah, that's good enough. So I've now gone and applied 4 different things to this image. I've done 4 different things. I've cropped it, I've sharpened it, and I've done unsharp masks twice. And I want to apply that to 99 other images as well. So the thing that I would do is I'd go into one of the processes called Process Container. And down here, I've got History Explorer. And if I drop this box down and select that image that I've just been using over here, I've just been working on, these are the 4 processes that I've applied. And I literally drag them one by one into the process container. And it will apply exactly the same parameters that I've done here to the other 99 images. And the way you do that is you then open up what they call in Insight an image container. And what I would then do is I would load into the image container all 100 images, all 100 files, and then just literally drag this triangle onto it, and it will apply those 4 processes to those 99 images there and then. And so that's how you actually apply a consistent level of adjustments to all those images. Once I've done that, and I've sharpened it and what have you, you've then got to, anyway, I'll do that. You've then got to align the images, because we all know that they're going to be moving around a little bit. And again, you do that with ImPPG. So you go into ImPPG, you go to Tools and Align Image Sequence. And in here, you just add the files. So I would literally add all 99 files or 100 files into this box. Come down here and choose a folder where I want ImPPG to save all of those aligned 100 files, and then hit Start Processing. And it's a matter of seconds. It will just align it. So I've then got all my images adjusted. So, you know, the contrast has been adjusted, been sharpened, they've been cropped. Maybe I've added some color and stuff like that. I've then gone into ImPPG here, and I've actually aligned it. So everything's kind of centered up. So I've now got 100 images all aligned and all had the same thing done to them. Now I've got to create a video. And this is another free piece of software. So here you are, 3 for the price of nothing. And I go into this program called PIP. And PIP allows you to create a GIF. So you would add your image files. So you literally choose all your 100 adjusted and aligned files, put them in here, click on join mode because we want to join them all together. Click on it's a Solar Lunar close-up because that's what it is. I wouldn't do an animation of a full disk. This would be something like a prominence or a sunspot, something like that. So generally I'd always be using this one. And then you go into this top row, input options. So I don't need to debay our image file, so I'll take that off. And you literally work through all of these. And again, there's videos online on how to actually do this. And then output options, I'd do it as an animated GIF, choose a folder where to save it, and then hit the start processing button. And it will literally stitch all those images together into one file, which will be the GIF. And what you end up with is, this is the one, some of you may not have actually seen it, but this is the one I did and posted online today. It's not exciting because it's not much happened. I was hoping something was going to happen. But this is the sunspot AR13030, and you can just see these little bright areas and what have you moving around. But that was 80 frames, all produced in that way. I did do 100, but there was passing cloud, and I had to get rid of 20 of them, what have you. So it's a bit difficult to see. I don't think you can just, yeah, zoom in a little bit more.
Yeah, we can see the effect.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Anyhow, let's say you can colorize them and do whatever you like with them, to be honest with you. But it's always nice when you get something interesting on there. But yeah, there's, as I say, PixInsight is what I use because it gives me the ability to actually make all those adjustments to all that data through one process and not have to adjust them individually, which I'm sure you can imagine would be a real pain. Affinity Photo, I don't know. I don't know how you do that, though I have seen there is something on Affinity Photo. Let me just let me go back and share the screen again, which I haven't looked into, but I thought, oh, that looks interesting. I wonder if that's how you do it in Affinity Photo. There was something called batch processing on Affinity Photo on one of the menu options. New batch job, that one there. I don't know what it does. Again, it says to me it does adjustments to a whole load of images, but I don't know if it does what PixInsight would actually do. So maybe someone to investigate and follow up on how you do it in Affinity Photo.
All right. Thank you very much, John.
Okay,
Thank you. Thanks for doing that.
Yeah.
no problem at all. I hope it was of interest. I hope it's giving you some, maybe it's giving you some new information. Hopefully, we'll see some more images coming out.